Hello and welcome to the Conference on Future Human Design. My name is Gregg Braden. I am tremendously honored and humbled to be at this conference to have the opportunity to share with you my perspective on artificial intelligence, compassionate design in artificial intelligence, where we're going with this and why we think this is important. My background, many people know me as a public speaker, and they know me as a speaker from the perspective of human potential. What a lot of people do not know is my scientific background. I am a degreed earth scientist with a background in computer science, uh, originally as a senior computer systems designer during the Cold War years in the defense industry, working in systems of pattern recognition. And it was in the pattern recognition software in the 1980s that we began to see the opportunity for what we now call synthetic intelligence or artificial intelligence. And the questions arose, even at that time, in terms of what that intelligence might look like. And the fundamental question for compassionate intelligence, compassionate artificial intelligence, or what some people now are calling synthetic intelligence, is simply this: are we attempting to simply mimic the experience of human compassion in machine intelligence? Or are we attempting to actually imbue the machine intelligence with the capability of unique and spontaneous responses in relation to other forms of life, to human life, and presumably other forms of life? These are two very, very different questions. They're very different perspectives. And the answer to these questions determines where we actually go with the kind of intelligence that we're talking about. For the purpose of my presentation here, I will present briefly my perspective, and I'm going to talk to Eddie. We're going to do some Q&A. I prefer to call what we are working with machine intelligence rather than artificial or synthetic intelligence. And the reason is because when we begin talking about artificial intelligence, we have to understand what our own intelligence really is all about, where it comes from, why it's possible. And I think as we go through this presentation, this will make a lot more sense. So I'm going to attempt to answer three fundamental questions. What is compassion, number one? If we're going to imbue or program artificial intelligence with compassion, we have to know what that is. So what is compassion? It means different things to different people. Number two, what is it? Why? Why are we attempting to give these qualities to machine intelligence? Because the answer to why we're attempting to give these qualities will determine how we go about working with those qualities. And number three is the question that I've just posed. Are we looking at genuine states of compassion or programmed responses in very certain circumstances? So let's begin with the first question. What is compassion? I know that compassion means different things to different people. And this is fascinating to me because I spend a lot of time with indigenous people, and specifically the Tibetans on the Tibetan plateau in a series of experiences, of journeys. 12 monasteries and 2 nunneries over 26 days were these journeys. And I had the opportunity to experience these journeys from the mid-1990s until the early 2000s, when it no longer became possible. And I say this because the Tibetans have focused their life energy and upon the preservation of compassion. And what I've come to understand is that in the West, compassion is often thought of as sympathetic pity. So we see somebody having a hard time, and we have some kind of pity for that person. From a Buddhist perspective and the Tibetan perspective, compassion is the end point of a series of experiences. The first experience is sympathy. In sympathy, we recognize the suffering of another individual. It's not our suffering, so we can't experience it, but we can recognize that some suffering is there. That's the sympathy. Empathy is the next step. Excuse me. And empathy, excuse me, and empathy is the ability to actually feel the suffering that another person is experiencing. So we say, I feel your pain in the loss of your loved ones. I feel your pain in the experiences that you're having. And the third step is compassion, where we both have sympathy and empathy and choose to act in a way that will help alleviate the suffering to some degree. So this is the sequence. First there's sympathy, then there's empathy, then there is compassion. Compassion being it doesn't mean it's successful, but it means it is the attempt to alleviate the suffering that we are now feeling through our our ability to empath with another individual. All right, so now that we know what compassion is, why would we want to imbue compassion into a machine intelligence? The research that I have, and is my past incarnation in the software industry. I was a senior computer systems designer in the software industry, and that led me to interact with leading programmers at the time and answer this question: why would we want to imbue compassion into an artificial or a machine intelligence? Number one, is it to make the machine intelligence more relatable to everyday people in everyday life, or is there something else happening? Is it an attempt to actually imbue into the machine intelligence the cherished human qualities that we want to preserve in our lives and in future generations? And these are two very, very different questions. I don't know the answer. These are the questions that we must ask ourselves before we can move forward, I think, in a meaningful way. We have to understand why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. So again, are we simply trying to make the machine intelligence easier to deal with, easier to relate to, friendlier to a general population? Or are we actually recognizing that we may be looking at a new life form, a new intelligence that is emerging, and we want at the early stage, at the foundational stage, to imbue that intelligence with the qualities that we cherish as humans? That's the second question. The third question, now we've essentially asked the third question. I'm going to elaborate just a little bit more. Do we want to simply have an array of programmed responses in the machine intelligence that are recalled at appropriate times? So that's one way of achieving this compassion in machine intelligence. Or are we hoping to actually imbue the machine intelligence with the ability to interact with the environment through sensors and through algorithms that will allow the machine intelligence to elicit unique responses that are appropriate for the context of the moment? And that is a very, very different and a much more complex way of going about doing this. So those are the three questions. Now, I think the way that we answer these is to look at our own compassion. And this is fascinating to me because as a degreed geologist, as well as a computer scientist, I love what the science has to say. So I'm going to share with you what science is telling us. We've asked science to tell us who we are. Science is doing a very good job. Many scientists do not like the answers that the science is revealing, because the answers that the new science is revealing do not support the traditional ideas of human origin or of human capabilities. So we have to ask ourselves, how can we solve the problems if we're not honest about the problems? How can we solve the problems if we're not honest about the answers that the science is revealing? So what I'll say is this. Modern humans, anatomically modern humans, that is what we are considered. We emerged mysteriously on this planet about 200,000 years ago. There are many theories in terms of how we appeared. The truth is, the evidence is not supporting many of those theories. So scientists do agree that we emerged 200,000 years ago. And when we did, there's a mysterious mutation in our genome that gives us the ability to have compassion that is unlike any mutation in any other form of life. So let me just describe this briefly because this will be important. Human chromosome 2 is the second largest chromosome in the genome. It's about 8% of the genome in every cell. And it is a mysterious chromosome because it is the product of the fusion of two pre-existing chromosomes in a way that cannot happen under natural circumstances. The proceedings for the National Academy of Sciences had a conference, and the paper that was released was termed Genetics from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And I have these references. I had hoped to show slides, and we may be able to show some of those slides as we go through this. But what the Academy is saying is that there was a mysterious telomere to telomere fusion of two pre-existing chromosomes that gave us human chromosome number 2. This is important because chromosomes typically do not fuse telomere to telomere. So what this means is in human chromosome 2, we have telomeres at both ends, and we also have telomeres in the middle of the chromosome. There are about a little over 1,200 genes in chromosome 2. One of those is gene TBR1. TBR1 is significant because gene TBR1 gave us a brain 50% larger than our nearest primate relatives, than the chimps and the orangutans and the apes. It gave us 76% of the neocortex that houses so many of the potentials, including the ability to have sympathy, empathy, and compassion, and to self-regulate our own bodies. This is all possible because of human chromosome number 2. The scientific community is saying this is not the product of that can happen under natural circumstances. Something happened that we do not understand that gave us this ability that no other form of life has the way that we have. So I think this is important to recognize as we are building machine intelligence, that we're attempting to imbue qualities that are still rare and mysterious when it comes to humans. We still do not fully understand why we have these abilities, and we don't fully understand the potential that they carry in our lives. So this is fascinating. It opens up the door to another conversation. If human chromosome 2 is not the product of natural evolutionary processes, what happened? As a scientist, I have to answer that question honestly. The honest answer is I do not know what happened, but because these kinds of fusions cannot happen under natural circumstances as we know them today, it appears that there was some kind of intervention. I don't know what that is. It's just something beyond the natural evolutionary process. All right, so we have this ability because of what happened 200,000 years ago, a fusion that we've never seen before, never seen since, in a way that doesn't appear to be the product of natural evolution. So when we begin looking at imbuing machine intelligence with these qualities, including compassion, including sympathy, including empathy, we've got to look at how we are actually able to achieve these in our own lives. So I'm just going to share a little bit of what the new science is telling us about us. How can we, this is the catch. This is the catch to engineering compassion into a machine intelligence. The catch is that we must first understand ourselves on a deeper level, and we must understand what compassion means to us on a deeper level. So what scientists tell us is that the average human body, whatever average is, the average human body has about 50 trillion or so cells. Every one of our cells, every one of our, excuse me, every one of our cells has an electrical potential of about 0.07 volts. So you can do the math, 0.07 volts times about 50 trillion or so cells. We're looking at a huge electrical potential in our bodies. But it doesn't stop there, because every one of our cells functions as a transistor, just like you would see in the electrical components that we build. Every one of our cells functions as a resistor. Every one of our cells functions as a capacitor. It stores and releases electrical potential in very precise times, in very precise ways. Every one of our cells emits photons, particles of light. Every one of our cells is receiving those photons, particles of light. Light is information, and that's important when we talk about engineering machine intelligence, because we're talking about the engineered intelligence interacting with the natural environment. And this is one of the ways that I'm going to talk about. So I'm highlighting it here through photons. Every one of our cells has receptors on the outside of the cells that are essentially biological antennae that send and receive. They transmit information into the environment, and they perceive information in the environment. Within the nucleus and within the cytoplasm, we have DNA. The DNA functions as an antenna, as a resonant antenna. It sends and receives information, and the DNA in the core of the nucleus, the genes, each function as tiny, tiny microscopic antenna, allowing us resonantly to interact with our environment in a sensory world in ways that we're only beginning to understand. And it goes even beyond that. Every cell in our body stores and retrieves information just the way that we store and retrieve information on a computer chip. So we literally are what is now recognized as a soft technology. Soft technology means we are not computer chips and wires and chemicals in the blood. Rather, we are neurons and cell membranes and crystalline structure in the endocrine glands and in the bones of our bodies. We literally are a soft technology with the ability to self-regulate our biology because of human chromosome number 2. These things are important to know to answer our questions. If we are attempting to imbue machine intelligence with the ability, the genuine ability to interact with in the environment, with other forms of life, including humans, rather than pre-program a series of responses and store them in an array and call them up at very precise times. If we're hoping for the prior, then what we must do is we must allow the machine intelligence to interact and sense the environment, to sense the context. First of all, what is the context within which the compassion is being elicited? Is it someone having a bad day? Is it someone who is angry? Is it someone who has experienced a deep loss? Is it a life and death situation? If the artificial intelligence is driving a vehicle and it has to make a choice of swerving that vehicle to avoid hitting a group of people, and in doing so is going to take the chance of maybe hitting and killing another person, this is where these judgment calls are going to come in. So rather than pre-programmed calls, the ability to actually interact with the environment. So context is important. And then the subtle cues from the environment. And I've just shared with you how humans interact with those subtle cues. We do it through vibration, through the inflection of the voice, the frequency of the voice, and the kinds of words that are being used in a situation. Maybe if it's a hostage situation and lives are at stake, and we're asking the artificial intelligence or the machine intelligence to intervene, and that intelligence is picking up the subtle cues of the person that is holding all the hostages, then through those cues, the AI within the machine intelligence can make determinations that maybe humans might be slow in picking up, making better judgment calls. So the machine intelligence must be able to interact uh, uniquely, spontaneously, real time with the environment. So voice frequency, voice inflection is one way of doing that. Photon emissions, not commonly talked about, a scientific fact, because our photon emissions change with our emotions. So if we're angry, or if we are hurt, or if we are frightened, or if we are happy and joyous, they are going to emit different kinds of photons that can be detected through sensors and run through the algorithms and paired with other kinds of information to arrive at a conclusion. The frequency of emotion itself. And again, this is where the boundaries between the sciences, we must cross the traditional boundaries that have separated the sciences in the past to arrive at a new technology and new understandings. So everything I'm saying to you is known in the box of biology or genetics or psychology or physiology or chemistry, but we've been trained to stay in those boxes. And now we're asking ourselves to do is something that requires us to go beyond the boxes, to cross the traditional boundaries that have separated the sciences, because now we're talking about real life. And real life doesn't know about those boundaries. Real life just knows that there's a world and we're interacting with that world. So the photon emissions, I think, are a vital part of this, and the frequencies of emotions that are detected resonantly through the various sensors, the biological sensors in our bodies, including genes, including DNA. This is epigenetics, is a term that I think many people may feel more comfortable with. Epigenetics acknowledges that biology responds real time to the environment. The environment can mean many things. It can be the external environment, it can be a chemical environment, it could be a nutritional environment. One of the most powerful forms of environment is the emotional environment. And it's because the emotions are driving so much of the biology in our bodies. A lot of this comes from the heart. We now know that the human heart has about 40,000 specialized cells. They're called sensory neurites, forming a neural network in the heart that thinks, feels, and remembers independently of the cranial brain. It's called the little brain in the heart. And it is through our ability to self regulate the relationship between the heart and the brain, and what's called heart brain coherence, that we change our heart rate variability. These are electromagnetic features that can be detected and sensed in space without physical contact. So, all of these are opportunities to imbue the machine intelligence with the input real time, spontaneously from the environment, running this information through the algorithms that are simulating our experiences of compassion so that the machine intelligence can respond in a meaningful way to unique circumstances rather than through pre programmed responses that may not be appropriate for the moment. So we could go on, and there's so much I'd love to share. I want to honor our time, and I really want to get to the questions. So I'm going to stop this part of the presentation right here. And what I'd like to say is this. I think ultimately, this is all coming back to where we began. The only way for us to engineer our experiences in a synthetic or an artificial or a machine intelligence is to understand ourselves, to understand our own compassion. And it is projects like this that are driving science to a deeper understanding of who we are, opening up new doors of possibilities to the ability to self-regulate our own biology and to explore our compassion to even deeper levels. I'm excited. Uh, I think this is a new frontier. It is the next frontier in external technology, but it's leading to the next frontier in internal technology. In the soft technology, as we understand perhaps for the first time what it really means to be human, so that we can imbue our most cherished qualities into the forms of life and the forms of intelligence that we are building for future generations. So I'll stop this part of the presentation here and we'll jump in. I'd love to take some questions, because the questions, I think, are where the really, really juicy information comes from as we begin applying what I've just shared to the problems that we're all facing today. So thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of my perspective on compassion and machine intelligence. And Eddie, I'm going to turn it back to you, and let's dive into some questions.
Thank you very much. It was amazing. It means that you think that if we want change the world, if you want to create a ethical, compassion AI, first we should start with changing and understanding ourselves, yes?
We must understand our own compassion, because that's what we're talking about, before we can imbue that into machine intelligence, if we truly want the machine intelligence to have a genuine, spontaneous, unique, compassionate response. If we, I mean, the easy way to do this, and this is what typically has been done in the past, is to have an array, a stored array in memory of compassionate responses that the machine intelligence or the AI will draw upon in a given experience. And it may work and it may not. So this is the big question I think we have to ask of ourselves. Do we want programmed responses, or are we asking ourselves to imbue the machine intelligence with the ability to respond to the real world, to interact and respond with the world spontaneously and uniquely, with genuine compassionate responses?
And what's your suggestion? In which direction you think we should go?
Well, I was a problem solver from the 1970s into the 1990s. My job was a problem solver for Fortune 500 companies during times of crisis. So in the 70s, it was the energy crisis. In the 80s, it was the Cold War crisis. In the 90s, I was the first technical operations manager for Cisco systems and the protocol converters that allowed the internet to come online and be what it is. And all of those were about solving problems. And I like solving problems. So my vote would be for the latter. My vote would be to imbue these new forms of machine intelligence to the best of our ability, with the ability to respond to the world with unique rather than pre-programmed responses that are appropriate for the situation and for the moment. And one of the reasons I think this is so important now, Eddie, is because we're just beginning. This is the ground floor. And as we lay the foundation for this technology that will evolve logarithmically, it'll evolve so quickly. I think it's important to get it right on the ground floor. And to get it right on the ground floor, I think my recommendation would be to use the sensors that are already available. We already have all of the sensors. We have sensors to measure heart rate variability. We have sensors to measure photon emissions. We have sensors to measure voice inflection, to measure frequency, subtle frequencies of voice and emotion. We have all of those. So to repurpose those sensors and to develop the algorithms that can take that data, and each time that the data is acquired, to then translate that into a unique response that is appropriate for the moment. And I think if we can get that right on the ground floor, that the first of all, the adoption of machine intelligence, I think will move much quicker because the machine intelligence will be more relatable, number one. Number two, Elon Musk and others have voiced concerns about the machine intelligence trying to accomplish its goals without having any form of compassion. So we don't want machine intelligence that ruthlessly achieves the goals at any cost. We need to have a way, a mitigating factor, a filter that the machine intelligence will look at all of the circumstances and all of the factors and then determine how best, what is the safest way with the least harm to other forms of life to achieve those goals. And I think that's only possible if we are giving the intelligence the ability to come at compassion uniquely and spontaneously rather than simply pre-programmed responses. I hope that makes sense. It was a long answer to a short question.
No. I was thinking exactly the same. Like we need this kind of the filter, the check. If not, we are screwed. But one more question, a few more questions. But this is, I think, for me, it's quite important. From your point of view, with your amazing knowledge about the world and human possibility, human potential, how far in the best scenario we can get in, let's say, next 30 years? Who we can become?
Are you who we as humans can become?
Yes, or it can be mixture,
Yeah.
like a cyborgs, or how you see our future?
Well, this is a very interesting question, and before I answer, I want to say I'm coming to you from a studio in northern New Mexico, and if you're watching any of the international news, we have huge fires that are burning. They've been burning for a month, and the smoke in the air is very hard on the voice and the sinuses. So I apologize for clearing my throat. So many times we're dealing with smoke from the fires in the forest. So I wanted to say that as we go on here. This is an interesting question, and I am actually involved in a number of research committees. I'm writing a new book on this. So let me answer it in this way. We, in the modern world, have been indoctrinated with a belief that humans are a weak, vulnerable, and flawed species of life. That we are biologically weak, that we are emotionally flawed. We've been led to believe that our emotions are problems. They're distractions, they're diversions. They keep us from working, making good decisions, and functioning efficiently. And because of that indoctrination that comes through our education system, it comes through our society, we have been led to believe that we need something outside of us to be healthy in life and to be successful in life. The answer to that is technology. So we have now entered an era where technology is being interfaced with the human body. And there's actually a movement that began early in the 20th century called the transhuman movement to do just that, to replace parts of the human body with artificial components. Eventually, that's phase one. Phase two is to replace the entire body with an indestructible body, a robotic body driven by a human brain. Phase three is to capture human consciousness on a computer chip for immortality. This is the thinking of the transhuman movement. We have the technology now to attempt to do these. I personally believe that consciousness cannot be captured on a chip because consciousness is more than what happens in the neurons of the brain. That's a whole different conversation. So the reason I'm saying this is because you're asking me where we're going in 30 years. There is a belief that we need to replace the human body and human logic and human capabilities with computer chips and with chemicals in the blood and sensors in the skin. That belief, Eddie, is only possible because we have never fully understood what it means to be human. I mentioned in my brief presentation, we are soft technology. Our cells already do everything that that technology does. Our cells are already the transistors, the resistors, the capacitors. We're already the sensors. We're already all of these things, except we do it better than the machines can ever do it. Now, let me qualify that. A computer chip is fast, and a computer chip will always be faster than the way that a human is thinking. However, now this is important. A computer chip is made of a physical material that is finite in its capabilities, whereas the human brain is scalable beyond what we even know to be possible right now. We used to believe that the high end, high frequency of a human brain was 40 cycles per second, 40 hertz. That was in the textbooks when I was in school back in the 1960s and 1950s, 1960s. The Tibetan meditators began showing that that's not true, that the human brain could go to 80 cycles per second. So we had to create new brain states. Then we went to 100 cycles per second, had to create new brain states. Now we're at 200 cycles per second, the gamma and the hyper gamma brain states. And now we're going even beyond that. So our biology is scalable, and we don't know the limits of our scalability. So where will we be in 30 years? I think we're going to have two parallel societies. I think we will have one society where individuals recognize the extraordinary potential within the natural human body and will develop that potential. I think we will see another part of society where they have adapted all the technology. And I think we will be living two parallel societies, and we will look at one another and we'll say, which path helps us to be happier? Which path is healthier? Which path is more fulfilling to us and our children? And from those two parallel societies, we will make a choice. And I think we'll probably land somewhere in between, where we may have some artificial components in our bodies, but we will not be replaced by the artificial components. So that's a long, again, long answer to a short question.
Yeah, but it's a very optimistic scenario. Ben, what do you think? What is the biggest problem or the first problem which we should solve now if we want to get to this beautiful scenario, not to Mad Max scenario?
I think for me, what's most important is that we're at this threshold, we're at a crossroads, where we now have the technology to forever change the human species. And in changing the human species, and what I mean by that is if we adopt, for example, computer chips in the brain, or if we are replacing our immune system with chemicals in our bodies, we can do all of those things. We don't know the long-term consequences. But what we do know, and I just wrote a section in the new book about this, a lot of research out there, our biology exhibits a very interesting principle in biology that is called use it or lose it. And what that means is if we don't use the systems in our bodies on a regular basis, our bodies think they're not necessary and they begin to atrophy. So for example, we now know that new neurons are being created every moment of life until our last breath. We are still creating new neurons from the hippocampus in the brain. We used to believe we had a limited number of neurons from birth and drew from those throughout life. That's not true. We are constantly producing new neurons. Here's the thing. If those new neurons are not engaged in a meaningful way within 14 days of emerging from the hippocampus, they will begin to atrophy, wither, and die. We've got to use them or we will lose them. So when we have young people, 2 years old, 3 years old, and they put on an artificial visor of virtual reality, and they are immersed in vivid images, deep colors, rapid scenarios and situations. Here's the key. They are observers watching everything being done for them. They are not creators. They're not using their imagination. They're not creating the situations. And by not engaging their neurons at an early age, it actually impacts their cognitive development. This is peer-reviewed science. We know this. If we become, from this crossroad, if we become immersed in a virtual reality and we stop using our neurons to create, to imagine, because the machines are doing it for us, that is one of the ways that we begin to atrophy as a species. So you say, okay, maybe one generation does it recreationally, but then the next generation begins to believe that we don't need some of those neurons. Same thing with any part of the body, with the immune system. If the immune system is programmed through chemicals to respond in a certain way, the natural sensors say, you don't need us anymore. And our natural ability to create the kinds of immunity that we've had for 200,000 years, it begins to atrophy. And we have to ask ourselves as a society, is this what we want? So here's the thing. We are at the point where we have the potential to give away our humanness before we even know what we're giving away. So I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong. What I'm saying is we owe it to ourselves to know, perhaps for the first time, the full extent of what it means to be human. What are the extraordinary potentials within us? And once we know what those are, I think we'll still have the machines, we'll still have the AI, we'll still have the synthetic intelligence, but we will feel less of a need to use it in the ways that we're talking about using it now, because we recognize that we're more than we have been led to believe. And we're not what we've been told in the past. We're not the weak, vulnerable, flawed species that we've been led to believe. So that's my personal, just one man's opinion.
Then you think that the most important problems or the things which should be solved now is find a way how people can recognize their greatness, their true nature.
I do. I believe it. I think what is up for all of us right now, the world is changing, and we all know that. And it's changing in ways that we've never seen. It's changing in ways that we're not prepared for. We have everything we need, including the resilience, to meet the new world in a healthy way if we can awaken the extraordinary potential of our own humanness. Now, we can use artificial intelligence, certainly, and we can use machine intelligence to aid us in our journey and to join us in our journey. But I think the most important thing is for us to know who we are, because it informs our story. And this is all about the human story. We live our lives based upon the way we've been taught to think about ourselves. We solve our problems, we choose our relationships, we build our society, we heal our bodies, we choose our politics, all based upon the way we've been taught to think about ourselves. So let me give you an example. Let me give you an example of where false information can be dangerous. Because in 1859, Charles Darwin introduced a concept of survival of the strongest. And those are his exact words. Later, they became survival of the fittest. But in his books, survival of the strongest. He introduced those concepts at a time when our society was developing. So our society today, our economic systems are based upon survival of the strongest. Our corporate systems are based upon survival of the strongest. And now we're talking about survival of the strongest in terms of the continuation of our species. The new science has overturned that. The new science shows that nature is based upon cooperation, not competition. Certainly it happens, but it's not the foundation. So as we're building a new society, as we're incorporating machine intelligence and artificial and synthetic intelligence into our society, if we can build based upon what we now know to be true about us and about our relationship to nature, cooperation is the fundamental rule, not competition. That informs us, Eddie, in terms of how we build machine intelligence to be cooperative rather than to be competitive. And when I say competitive, I'm not talking about a friendly game of soccer. When we talk about competition, we're talking about what's called violent competition in biology. So that's why that's just an example. I think the better we know ourselves, the better equipped we are to solve the problems of life in a healthy way and to build the new emerging society in a way that reflects the true laws of nature. And I think that's really what we want.
Thank you very much. And one more thing, so I was started talking about a Kogi Indian and about a Patrick. And he said to me that he have this 5 biggest project around the world. One of them is this saving the Amazon together with indigenous people. But he said to me that he'd love to help us with this compassion AI because he thinks that this is the most important problem which should be solved now, to create the compassion AI, what you said about this kind of the filter. And he said that we can create kind of the round table, that he can organize that 100 or 200 shamans from different and chiefs from different indigenous people, indigenous tribes. And on the other side of the table, round table, have no side, of course, we love to put the AI people, the philosopher, the business people, the technology. And I think now, like you said, we are on the crossroad. And I think we should mix the ancient knowledge about ourselves with a new technology which help us to understand the things about the mystics we're talking. And my question is, maybe you want to help us with this.
Well, I would be honored, and I would be excited to do just that. And I think, as you know, I've spent much of my adult life with indigenous peoples from the highlands of central China and Tibet, in India and Nepal, and certainly the Bedouin in Egypt, and all through the Andes Mountains of Peru and into Bolivia and the Altiplano and the American Desert Southwest. And what I've discovered is that while the indigenous people are not scientists in the way that we think of today, they do have a deep understanding and a deep memory of our relationship to the world around us, but also to ourselves. And I think this is really, really where we are in this crossroads right now. We are building something outside of ourselves, trying to mimic what we already are within ourselves. And we are at a crossroad where we stand to lose our humanness if we don't embrace it in this generation. And I think that fundamental principle is it is both philosophic as well as scientific. And I think it is vital that we create the values. What is it that we value? Do we value our humanness? Do we value our emotions? Do we value our memories? Do we value our compassion? Do we value our willingness to risk our lives to help another person who is in a burning building or in a car accident or in a drowning in a river? And there are some people that believe those values are what keep us from being logical and efficient. I personally love and cherish those values, and I think it's what sets us apart from all other forms of life. And I think as we owe it to ourselves to understand who we are first. And I do think I agree that the compassionate AI is important. Elon Musk recently in an interview said that he believed that the ability to create compassionate AI was more of a threat than nuclear war in the world right now. And that's a big statement, especially for where the world is
Yeah.
right now. Yeah. So I think the desire, Eddie, to build the compassionate AI is driving us to understand ourselves on a deeper level.
Of course,
Yeah.
because for me, even started talking about the compassion. It's pushing people to asking themselves about the compassion. I deeply believe, like you already said, that the question changing us, not the answer. I think if we started asking ourselves what's good, what's bad, and we really will follow our answer with our heart, with our spirit, we really can change the world. Another thing is just, intellectual masturbation, that we are wonderful, we are amazing, and will simply lost everything in a few years if we didn't change ourselves.
Yeah. It for me, it all goes back 200,000 years ago. We appeared on Earth. And the truth is, we don't know where we came from. There
Yeah.
are theories. And there was a genetic fusion that gave us something that no other form of life has. I think we owe it to ourselves to explore that potential to the fullest extent, find out what it means to be human, and to allow the technology to serve us in a journey rather than depending upon the technology to to be to replace us in so many respects. So
Yeah.
I think that's from my perspective, one man's perspective. That's where we find ourselves now. I would be honored to have no corner, but a little place on that round table, and I look
Will,
forward to following up to see where that leads.
will be great honor. I think in next 2 weeks we'll be prepare some ideas with the people which we'd love to invite. And it will be great honor for me if you want to be the part of organizing this event together with this amazing people like Nina Meyerhoff, Anna Maria, Erwin Laszlo. It will be great honor, simply. And one more
I
thing.
would be in such good company. Those are all dear friends, and I would be in very good company with all of them.
Yeah,
Thank you.
they are amazing.